Good morning. Hey, thank you for coming. I really appreciate that. Obviously, it's National Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and so what an appropriate time to take some proactive measures to address this issue. I do want to thank our partners for being here today. We have Against Abuse, we have Pinal Hispanic Council, we have Simpatico, Casa Grande Alliance, and the Zonta Club. So thank you very much for coming to this. I want to start off today and make a brief statement about this issue that's tearing our communities apart. When I was a police officer in Miami, Arizona, I had the opportunity to see the impact that it has on families. And Miami is a very small town, so you kind of know people. And to be an officer there, you get to know everyone there. And it's kind of a very unique role to play when you grow up in a community that you're policing. And so one day I was at the department in the office, and this young kid came running in very upset and saying that he needed help because his mom was being abused by his father. And it was right down the street. Their house was right down the street from where they lived. So in Miami, we had to get the fire department to actually watch the radio when we sent an officer to the scene. So we had to go get the fire department before I could respond. So anyway, as I'm driving up to the residence, she was his mother, who I knew, the son was a very good friend of mine. And the mother was running down the hill, and I just saw the fear in her eyes. And when I got out of my car and talked to her, she was like, "Johnny, please help me." And I could just see that she was very, very fearful. And then the husband came walking down shortly after and just said, "Arrest me." So that's what I did, because I knew something was going on. But it really had an impact on my career as a young officer, because you get to see that fear and the impact it has on our victims, especially people that you know. And so later on in my career, I have been involved with domestic violence investigations. I was the supervisor of our domestic violence unit and our sex crimes unit. And once again, that awareness made me understand how important our role is in addressing this issue. And we've had issues here in our community as well. And I'm not going to get into specifics, but there's been two since I've been here that have been very impactful and really hit the community hard. And I know that there's people here that were a part of our efforts to raise that awareness in our Cherish Our Children event. And that was a first step in our efforts. And this is a continuation of those efforts. So today we are going to do, as Thomas mentioned, our first ever domestic violence roundup. And what that means is we're going after the offenders that have committed domestic violence related offenses, and they have warrants. So we've identified 70 warrants, or 70 individuals that have warrants in our community as offenders. So our goal is simply to send them a message that, no, you need to go to court and be accountable to your crimes and how you've impacted your family. But it's not just about the offender that we're talking about here. It's about the victim. And that's what we want to send a message to them as well, that we're here for you and that you're not alone. And we are partnering with our partners to provide this pamphlet to our victims as we go and arrest these individuals and let them know that you don't have to go through this alone, that there's people out here that care and that want to help you, and we're here to do just that. So we're going to leave information there at their residence if they have any questions or needs for assistance. So anyway, I just real briefly kind of want to share some of the statistics that are related to domestic violence here in Casa Grande. Year to date, we've had 1,176 calls for service that are domestic violence related. Now, that doesn't mean that these resulted in an arrest or an actual case. It just means that somebody, we'll wait till our delivery goes by. These calls just mean that somebody felt that they needed help at that moment in time, some sort of intervention. And obviously, we're the first ones that are available for people to call. So we've been there 1,176 times. We actually had 456 reports year to date. That means it rose to the level of a crime that we actually had to take a criminal report on these incidents. And I'm not going to break them down. It's just enough to say that we do have a problem and we do have to continue to do more about that. And that, once again, I'm hoping this will be a continued effort to do just that. But I don't want this to be about just the police department, because again, we can't do this by ourselves. So I want to give an opportunity for some of our partners to come up and talk about their part in this effort. So first I want to introduce Pat Griffin, who's the Executive Director Against Abuse. Pat, please come on up.
This is really a very exciting event that's happening today, and in talking with Johnny and Thomas over the last few days, just knowing that the police department is paying attention and is going to follow up on some of the things that we see on a daily basis really makes me feel really good. And Thomas mentioned that there are about 70 people that you're going to be knocking on their door in the next few days. That sounds like a lot to me. Thomas said that's not as many as he might have expected, but to me, I think anything that's a beginning and a first step is the way that you have to do it. We really feel that working together makes us all stronger, and your police department here in Casa Grande is really part of the fabric of the work that we do. And all law enforcement has to be involved, or when the women and the children come to our shelter, there's no after for them if they don't think that there is something going to happen to the perpetrator. And just to follow up on a couple of your statistics, I looked back to see what we had done in 2013 in terms of numbers in our shelter and the people that we've seen. We had, and this is a staggering statistic for me, 20,497 bed nights in our domestic violence shelter last year, in 2013. That is a lot of bodies staying in a shelter, trying to be protected. And what you all are doing is helping us along that way in terms of that protection. That represents over 500 women for those 20,000 nights. So I think that's pretty staggering. That's a lot for us. We also saw over 300 women in what we call our outpatient services. And those are women that come in for services that don't want to go into shelter. They don't feel they need shelter, but they want help and education in terms of how they might survive the situation. So I think that is a lot too. We also did over 7,000 hours of domestic violence education throughout Pinal County. That's talking to groups like Zonta and sororities and Kiwanis and Rotary and education groups in the schools and the PTAs, et cetera, et cetera. We do a lot of training in Maricopa schools on dating violence and that type of thing, and sixth graders, and trying to help them so that as they get into junior high and middle school, they're recognizing what the violence is all about and how they can avoid it. Those are just some. Thomas told me less than a minute, so I'm just putting it together really quick. But those are some of the staggering statistics that I thought of when I was thinking about today and thinking about the wonderful work that you're going to be doing. And don't back down. You know, abusers are very manipulative and very cunning, and they'll say, "Oh, it was not me; it was somebody else," et cetera, et cetera. I just hope that you really go out there and do what you said you're going to do and bring some of them so that we can go to court and find some justice in this. So thank you. Thank you for what you're doing.
Mr. Varela, can you please come up and speak on behalf of the Pinal Hispanic Council, please?
Just a minute, Ralph. That's not going to happen.
Well, Pat took 3 minutes, so I'm really down to 20 seconds. Good afternoon, good morning, as Chief Executive Officer of Pinal Hispanic Council, I'm really proud to be here, as well as a council member for Casa Grande. I think everything we've always seen on about DV. I'll do the pause. You got the UPS, and I got the airplane. Everything we've always seen about DV with law enforcement is I believe it's one of the hardest cases to respond to, because you've got two individuals who are in conflict, and police department gets there, and a lot of the times those two individuals then turn on law enforcement. And so I realize what a difficult task that all of you have. I know I've talked to the chief previously about that part of your work is kind of like part of our work, as part of it is social work in nature, because of some of the things that you do to connect individuals with services at the time that it's occurring. But I think this is a real great opportunity, because it puts together the Casa Grande Police Department, social services, other stakeholders, the community, and survivors together to really respond to something in a united way. I think the other part of it is that for Pinal Hispanic Council, we see a lot of the survivors. When they come in, there's a sense of not having empowerment. There's a sense of having to make real difficult decisions about where to stay, what resources are needed, emergency assistance. And we also see the other side of it when we have the perpetrators who are referred to the courts that come to receive what we call the Duluth model, and it's 27 weeks of group intervention that they must complete to be able to make sure that they go through the court process and are successful. I think the other part is that domestic violence hits across all spectrums of our community, the economic, the social services, law enforcement. All of the major institutions are really impacted by domestic violence. And I think this kind of a partnership really speaks to about the real goal, and that is to have a community that's responsive, first of all, but it's also compassionate to survivors, to ensure that that everything that is done for survivors is done with all the resources available. And I've known Pat for actually the short 10-second story. As Pat was leaving Baca, Wayne, a long time ago, I was coming into Baca, and I saw Against Abuse become a one-person agency to the great organization that it is today. So I know that survivors are well taken care of, and I know the passion that Pat has for it. So thank you for all you do, and thanks to the police department for all you do. Thank you.
One of our guests wasn't able to show up today, or one of our partners, so I'm going to skip down to the Casa Grande Alliance and my good friend, Cindy Shader, who's the executive director.
Good morning. My name is Cindy Shader. I'm the executive director of the Casa Grande Alliance. And we are a 56-member coalition and nonprofit organization dedicated to reducing substance abuse and violence in our communities. And the correlation between domestic violence and substance abuse is absolutely undeniable. When someone abuses alcohol and other drugs, they enter an altered state of consciousness. And in that altered state, they have poor decision-making skills, they have reduced inhibitions, and as any police officer that works a Sunday night knows, after the family's been together all weekend and there's been drugs and alcohol involved, you're very likely to enter a domestic violence situation. Early in my career, I had the privilege of working at the Pinal County Jail as a counselor. And I remember walking past the isolation cell one day, and this gentleman called out to me, and he said, "Ma'am, could you help me?" And I said, "Sure, let me see if I can help you." And he said, "Could you tell me why I'm covered with blood?" He said, "I have cuts on my head, but I don't know that that's what the blood is." And I said, "Well, over the weekend, you got intoxicated on drugs, and you got in a fight with the police officers, and it took 5 of them to take you down. So I'm sure you've got some bumps on the head from that little tussle. But it's not your blood on your shirt, it's your mother's. Because in a drug-induced state, you went to your mother's home and beat her to death with a baseball bat. I talked to people who knew him later. He was a wonderful and gentle man when he was sober. It's not an unfamiliar story. So we know that if we can reduce substance abuse, we can reduce violence. So we take care of the substance abuse part, Pat takes care of the violence part, and Ralph works with the survivors. And I guess I'm a survivor too, because I remember at the age of 17 coming home from a date, no doubt, and finding my mother, who was recently divorced, in her bedroom, intoxicated. Her clothes were torn, and her face was bruised. And I asked her what happened, and she said her boyfriend had beat her up. So I called 911. Probably wasn't 911 back then. I don't know if we had that system back in the day, but I called the police and I said, I need your help. My mother's boyfriend has beaten her up. And the officer on the other end of the line said, honey, if your mom wants to let her boyfriend beat her up, there's nothing I can do about it. Thank God it's not like that anymore. Because I know that tonight, if a 17-year-old girl calls Casa Grande Police Department, someone's going to help her. Someone's going to keep her from getting hurt, and someone's going to help mom from being hurt, and someone's going to help that man change in some way. Whether he needs treatment or incarceration, it's going to be different. And I'm thankful for the partners in the community and the Casa Grande Police Department for saving children and women and men from the horrible fate that is domestic violence. Thank you, Chief, for letting me come and be a part of this.
Thank you so much for coming, and especially to our partners. Once again, there's no way that we could do this alone, and so we really appreciate that. But I do want to say a couple of closing comments. First, I want to acknowledge a special guest that showed up today, Chief Joe Shelley from Show Low PD. I also want to introduce Sergeant Alanis, who's going to be in charge of the mission to go out and identify and find these offenders. And so he's done a really good job organizing this event, and we're going to have several teams that are going to go out for the next 2 days and bring these individuals to justice. So I want to thank you, Sergeant Alanis, for coming out and doing these things. So I really appreciate that. And one last thing I want to touch on was what Pat talked about, the training aspect. And I do want to compliment one of our partners that isn't here today, is the Pinal County Attorney's Office. They're taking a very strong stance, much like we are, against domestic violence. And they've increased the training aspect of the violence, and especially to law enforcement. There wasn't the training that had to do with the choking aspect and how to identify the strangulation, and establishing protocols on how to investigate that, because a lot of times we were missing that. We weren't trained what to look for, because it's very subtle things that happen when you're strangled. And so our officers were now trained in being able to identify those things. And so I did want to touch on that as well. But anyway, I just want to thank everyone for coming, because it is an important issue, and I just want the victims to know that we will be here and we're not going away, and we are going to send a message that this is not acceptable. So thank you very much for coming.